The railway porters, the messengers at the exchange, the workers at the custom house, the town messengers in the capitals, who are collectively responsible for each member, enjoy such a reputation that any amount of money or banknotes is trusted to the hotel member by the merchants. In the building trades, hotels of from 10 to 200 members are formed, and the serious builders and railway contractors always prefer to deal with an hotel than with separately hired workers. The last attempts of the Ministry of War to deal directly with productive hotels form ad hoc in the domestic trades, and to give them orders for boots and all sorts of brass and iron goods, are described as most satisfactory, while the renting of a crown iron work (Votkins) to an hotel of workers, which took place 7 or 8 years ago, has been a decided success. We can thus see in Russia how the old medieval institution, having not been interfered with by the state (in its informal manifestations), has fully survived until now, and takes the greatest variety of forms in accordance with the requirements of modern industry and commerce. As to the Balkan Peninsula, the Turkish Empire and Caucasia, the old guilds are maintained there in full. The estates of Servia have fully preserved their medieval character. They include both masters and journeymen, regulate the trades, and are institutions for mutual support in labour and sickness. British Consular Report, April 1889. While the Amkari of Caucasia, and especially at Tiflis, add to these functions a considerable influence in municipal life. A capital research on this subject has been published in Russian in the Zapiski (Memoirs) of the Caucasian Geographical Society, Volume 6, to Tiflis, 1891, by C. Egazarov. In connection with cooperation, I ought perhaps to mention also the friendly societies, the unities of Oddfellows, the village and town clubs organized for meeting the doctor's bills, the dress and burial clubs, the small clubs very common among factory girls, to which they contribute a few pence every week, and afterwards draw by lot the sum of £1, which can at least be used for some substantial purchase, and many others. A not inconsiderable amount of sociable or jovial spirit is alive in all such societies and clubs, even though the credit and debit of each member are closely watched over. But there are so many associations, based on the readiness to sacrifice time, health and life if required, that we can produce numbers of illustrations of the best forms of mutual support. The Lifeboat Association in this country, and similar institutions on the continent, must be mentioned in the first place. The former has now over 300 boats along the coast of these isles, and it would have twice as many were it not for the poverty of the fishermen, who cannot afford to buy lifeboats. The crews consist, however, of volunteers whose readiness to sacrifice their lives for the rescue of absolute strangers to them is put every year to a severe test. Every winter the loss of several of the bravest among them stands on record, and if we ask these men what moves them to risk their lives even when there is no reasonable chance of success, their answer is something on the following lines: a fearful snowstorm blowing across the Channel raged on the flat, sandy coast of a tiny village in Kent, and a small smack laden with oranges stranded on the sands nearby. In these shallow waters only a flat-bottomed lifeboat of a simplified type can be kept, and to launch it during such a storm was to face an almost certain disaster. And yet the men went out, fought for hours against the wind, and the boat capsized twice. One man was drowned, the others were cast ashore. One of these last, a refined coastguard, was found next morning, badly bruised and half frozen in the snow. I asked him how they came to make that desperate attempt. "I don't know myself," was his reply. "There was the wreck, all the people from the village stood on the beach, and all said it would be foolish to go out, we never should work through the surf. We saw 5 or 6 men clinging to the mast, making desperate signals. We all felt that something must be done, but what could we do? 1 hour passed, 2 hours, and we all stood there. We all felt most uncomfortable. Then all of a sudden, through the storm, it seemed to us as if we heard their cries. They had a boy with them. We could not stand that any longer. All at once we said we must go. The women said so too. They would have treated us as cowards if we had not gone, although next day they said we had been fools to go. As one man we rushed to the boat and went. The boat capsized, but we took hold of it. The worst was to see poor drowning by the side of the boat, and we could do nothing to save him. Then came a fearful wave. The boat capsized again, and we were cast ashore. The men were still rescued by the D-boat. Ours was caught miles away. I was found next morning in the snow. The same feeling moved also the miners of the Rhonda Valley when they worked for the rescue of their comrades from the inundated mine. They had pierced through 32 yards of coal in order to reach their entombed comrades, but when only 3 yards more remained to be pierced, fire depth enveloped them. The lamps went out, and the rescue men retired. To work in such conditions was to risk being burned up at every moment. But the raps of the entombed miners were still heard, the men were still alive and appealed for help, and several miners volunteered to work at any risk, and as they went down the mine, their wives had only silent tears to follow them, not one word to stop them. There is the gist of human psychology. Unless men are maddened in the battlefield, they cannot stand it to hear appeals for help and not to respond to them. The hero goes, and what the hero does, all feel that they ought to have done as well. The sophisms of the brain cannot resist the mutual aid feeling, because this feeling has been nurtured by thousands of years of human social life and hundreds of thousands of years of pre-human life in societies. But what about those men who were drowned in the Serpentine in the presence of a crowd, out of which no one moved for their rescue? It may be asked. What about the child which fell into the Regent's Park Canal, also in the presence of a holiday crowd, and was only saved through the presence of mind of a maid who let out a Newfoundland dog to the rescue? The answer is plain enough. Man is a result of both his inherited instincts and his education. Among the miners and the seamen, their common occupations and their everyday contact with one another create a feeling of solidarity, while the surrounding dangers maintain courage and pluck. In the cities, on the contrary, the absence of common interest nurtures indifference, while courage and pluck, which seldom find their opportunities, disappear or take another direction. Moreover, the tradition of the hero of the mine and the sea lives in the miners' and fishermen's villages, adorned with a poetical halo. But what are the traditions of a motley London crowd? The only tradition they might have in common ought to be created by literature, but a literature which would correspond to the village epics hardly exists. The clergy are so anxious to prove that all that comes from human nature is sin, and that all good in men has a supernatural origin, that they mostly ignore the facts which cannot be produced as an example of higher inspiration or grace coming from above. And as to the lay writers, their attention is chiefly directed towards one sort of heroism, the heroism which promotes the idea of a state. Therefore they admire the Roman hero or the soldier in the battle, while they pass by the fisherman's heroism, hardly paying attention to it. The poet and the painter might of course be taken by the beauty of the human heart in itself, but both seldom know the life of the poorer classes, and while they can sing or paint the Roman or the military hero in conventional surroundings, they can neither sing nor paint impressively the hero who acts in those modest surroundings which they ignore. If they venture to do so, they produce a mere piece of rhetoric. Escape from a French prison is extremely difficult. Nevertheless, a prisoner escaped from one of the French prisons in 1884 or 1885. He even managed to conceal himself during the whole day, although the alarm was given and the peasants in the neighborhood were on the lookout for him. Next morning found him concealed in a ditch close by a small village. Perhaps he intended to steal some food or some clothes in order to take off his prison uniform. As he was lying in the ditch, a fire broke out in the village. He saw a woman running out of one of the burning houses, and heard her desperate appeals to rescue a child in the upper story of the burning house. No one moved to do so. Then the escaped prisoner dashed out of his retreat, made his way through the fire, and with a scalded face and burning clothes, brought the child safe out of the fire and handed it to its mother. Of course he was arrested on the spot by the village gendarme, who now made his appearance. He was taken back to the prison. The fact was reported in all French papers, but none of them bestirred itself to obtain his release. If he had shielded a warder from a comrade's blow, he would have been made a hero of. But his act was simply humane. It did not promote the state's ideal. He himself did not attribute it to a sudden inspiration of divine grace, and that was enough to let the man fall into oblivion. Perhaps 6 or 12 months were added to his sentence for having stolen the state's property, the prison's dress. The countless societies, clubs, and alliances for the enjoyment of life, for study and research, for education and so on, which have lately grown up in such numbers that it would require many years to simply tabulate them, or another manifestation of the same ever-working tendency for association and mutual support. Some of them, like the broods of young birds of different species which come together in the autumn, are entirely given to share in common the joys of life. Every village in this country, in Switzerland, Germany, and so on, has its cricket, football, tennis, ninepins, pigeon, musical or singing clubs. Other societies are much more numerous, and some of them, like the Cyclist Alliance, have suddenly taken a formidable development. Although the members of this alliance have nothing in common but the love of cycling, There is already among them a sort of freemasonry for mutual help, especially in the remote nooks and corners which are not flooded by cyclists. They look upon the CAC, the Cyclist Alliance Club, in a village as a sort of home, and at the yearly cyclist camp many